Good evening, fellow gearheads, and happy Labor Day to my American friends. And wherever you might be, I hope your weekend is going great. This is my 5,000 mile review already on this KTM 390 adventure. I bought this motorcycle at the very end of May of this year. And let's see here, we got May, June, July, August, almost into September. Oh, we are into September already. Dang, that went by quick. But that was 5,000 miles in about 3 months' time. And yes, I do have a full-time job and a family and all that other good stuff. So you really got to like riding to get that many miles in 3 months and still keep everything else going. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about this motorcycle, the reasons I purchased this motorcycle, the purposes that I had in mind for it, how it's performed with those purposes, and then lastly, would I buy this motorcycle again? Here in America, on the West Coast, I'm on the West Coast of Oregon. This motorcycle costs just about, this one here I think was $8,500 out the door. So that's 8,500 US dollars. It did come with 3 years worth of licensing, and other than that, that was about it. So I guess if you took off the 3 years of licensing, it maybe would put it down to about the $8,100, $8,200 mark. And that's the going rate out here. The bikes I was considering when I bought this were the Honda 300 Rally, the CRF 300 Rally, the WR250R by Yamaha, and of course they don't make that bike anymore. So I was looking at used models for that bike. And then last, the KLX 300. My concerns with 250cc motorcycles was that I do tend to have to do a lot of highway, and it just kind of sucks whenever you're on a 250cc motorcycle and you are just wringing its neck. You're just winding it out as hard as it'll go, and that just does not feel comfortable to me. The CRF 300 Rally, I really love the looks of that bike. I love the profile of that bike. I love just a ton of things about that motorcycle. My problem with it was that the suspension was so abysmally soft that even right out of the box I would have to replace the suspension. It's just unbelievably undersprung. I'm not sure why that is. I'm really not. But I didn't have the time to buy a new motorcycle and then go spend $1,000 on suspension upgrades in just within a couple of weeks of buying the bike. I needed to buy a bike and then be able to take off on a trip, on a really long road trip with my younger brother very shortly after I bought this motorcycle. So that kind of pulled that CRF 300 Rally out of the running for me. Now I think Itchy Boots has been running one around the planet for the last several months, and good on her, good for her. But I'm pretty sure that's all she does is ride that motorcycle. I got too many other things going on to just worry about, prepping a motorcycle for trips. The next one was the WR250R. I wish Yamaha would make a WR300R version of that motorcycle. That was my first choice, and at the time when I was looking at this bike and the Honda, the only ones I could find on the WR were used bikes, through Craigslist or Facebook or whatever. And they were either just completely way overpriced or just beat to ever-loving shit. That's the bottom line. People that ride those bikes either, it seems it's kind of weird, on one end of the scale, they either don't ride them really at all, or they just deck them out and just run the balls off of them. And but in all honesty, at that time, there just wasn't any of them listed. there really weren't any in the market to speak of. So the next one on the list is the KLX 300. I love Kawasaki's. I've owned many Kawasaki's through the years. I like that bike. Adjustable suspension front and rear. It gets really high marks, really good reviews. The downside to it, though, was the wind protection part. I've complained about it in the past. I have a really horrible neck, and I have to have wind protection on my motorcycles. I just cannot deal with headwinds for very long periods of time. So, yeah, you can buy one. You can put the, put an aftermarket windshield on it, and it'll probably do just fine for you. But again, I just wasn't ready to have to try to take on all of that stuff. I was just basically trying to buy a bike that was out of the box, ready to roll, and the KTM kind of met that mark. It met it the best for me at the time. The last bike I had was a KLR 650. It was a 2008 model KLR 650, so it had really, really good fairing on it. The bike did wonderful in most environments. On the road, it was fantastic to ride. I love a big thumper. I love a heavy flywheel. Great fuel economy, incredible reliability. They call it the apocalypse bike for a reason. You can pretty much ride a KLR off a cliff and then, stand it back up on its wheels, let the overflow from the carburetor bleed out and light it right off, and off you go. They're just really, an anvil of a motorcycle. My biggest problem with it, though, was its weight. Whenever I was in really hard off-road technical stuff, the weight of the bike just became too overwhelming. And every time you put the bike down, which you do tend to do in really rugged, aggressive off-road riding, it was pretty pathetic. I've gotten older. I'm not a young spring chicken anymore, and when a bike goes down on me, it's pretty difficult to get it up, especially whenever it's hitting the 500-pound mark. So I needed to scale down from that, and of course the seat height. The seat is extremely tall on that KLR, especially mine. Mine was pretty tall. So I had to make a decision: take that bike on that road trip with my brother, or go down and just pick up a new bike quickly. So prior to that KLR 650, I did have a VStrom 650 by Suzuki, which was an amazing motorcycle. I went down and I bought it brand new off the showroom floor in about 2005. I ordered everything they sold for it, the hard bags, the heated grips, the center stands, the exhaust, just about everything they sold for it. And I absolutely loved that motorcycle. I rode the wheels off that motorcycle. I think, if memory serves me, it was a 2006 or a 2007 model, and I sold it in about 2008, 2009, somewhere in there, with about 45,000 miles on the clock. It was just a wonderful motorcycle. It was one of those motorcycles you buy and you have zero buyer's remorse from, after you pick up the bike and you start riding it regularly. Very, very wonderful motorcycle. Unfortunately, in the dual sport environment, it's a street bike. That's just all there is to it. It's a street bike. It has the power delivery of a street bike. It has the weight of a street bike. The ground clearance was pretty decent, but in off-road environments, it was pretty easy to start bashing that bottom side of that motor. Otherwise, the bike was just absolutely fantastic. I have zero complaints about that product. That is a wonderful motorcycle. Absolutely wonderful. After that, I did get a DRZ 400. I did get the Supermoto version, though, and I had thought about switching the wheels over for knobbies, to ride off-road and everything with. But the seat on the bike was absolutely brutal. The fuel tank was abysmal. I think my range was about 80 miles. Of course, zero wind protection. There was just so much to do for it back then that I just didn't want to spend all the time and the extra money to hassle with all that when I could just go out and get a KLR 650 that would do it all right out of the box. So that was my choices back then. Of course, I was much younger and stronger and more resilient than I am now. And now I find that a lot of my choices, from the couch that I buy to the car that I buy to the motorcycle I buy, had better be in keeping with the comforts that I require at this point in my life. So call me a pussy, call me whatever you want, but that's just what it is. Let's see here. So on to this little 390 here. I just passed the 5,000 mile mark this weekend, riding up on Mount Hood. It thus far has been a really reliable motorcycle. It's not broken down once. The only stall outs I had were back in Moab and on some of the off-road routes I've done out here, and that was kickstand related. I have adjusted that little sensor for the proximity switch on the kickstand, so that hasn't happened to me in quite a while. Otherwise, you know, I hit the button and it lights up every time and off I go, with really no issues. I would say the biggest hassle are all the stinking lights that seem to come on the dashboard all the time. Whether it's a fuel light like you saw in my last video, and the fuel light of course lights up the warning light. You know, they use that little triangle down there, and I think for a lot of automobiles and motorcycles that triangle is an engine light. I know that it's a kind of a universal warning light, but I gotta say, maybe it's just me, but here in America, we're not used to seeing those lights light up. And so when you see the one light up on here, and of course it doesn't just light up that light, it puts a big bar across the top that tells you your fuel is low, and then you've got a red flashing fuel gauge over here, just all of this stuff going on. I mean, and we're talking about within a 6 by 3 inch area, so I'm pretty sure that if just one of them was going off, you would pay attention to it. It could probably just be, you know, tapered down to just the damn fuel gauge. If I see that is lighting up, I know it's the fuel. I don't need 2 more indicators to tell me it's the fuel. But I don't know, maybe some folks do, I guess. The fuel range on this motorcycle, speaking of fuel lights, is pretty good. You know, if you're really hot rodding it, I think you could probably get 150 to 180 miles on the tank, and that's really just wringing the nuts out of the thing. If you're just cruising along, you know, 55, 65, 70, stuff like that, 200, 220, 230, I think I've hit 240 on the tank. That's pretty great, you know. No, I have zero issues, and the computer, you know, the fuel range computer is operating in real time, so it's registering your throttle input, it's registering all of that, and it's using that to calculate the estimated range of the motorcycle in that condition. And I have to say it's a pretty handy feature. My BMW had a fuel range indicator. My Triumph has a fuel range indicator. Some of my old bikes, they didn't have any such wizardry, but it's a nice feature when it works properly. Let me put that out there. The 390 here, when that light starts flashing and everything, the bells and whistles are all going off, I've still got 80 to 90 miles of range when that happens. So that makes it pretty irritating. But I hate to say it, but on bikes like this, you kind of get used to just ignoring all of this stuff, and I guess that's the problem with it. When they're putting up all this crap on the screen, you just start ignoring everything because it's just constantly putting up something on there, you know, side stand, fuel range, whatever. And so they defeat their own purpose, you know what I mean? If they just simply, you know, condensed it to whatever that is. But the fuel range has been great. Reliability has been great, top notch, no worries. Dirt worthiness, I'm sorry, but this is a street bike. It's a street bike with knobby tires and spoked wheels, you know, tubeless spoked wheels. But it's really effectively a street bike. The travel range, the suspension range, as far as how much travel you have, are all street bike numbers. I believe even the geometry, the steering geometry, those are all street bike numbers. Can you do dirt roads? Yeah, you can do dirt roads. I've seen guys running these things over horrible mountain passes. Can you do that? Yeah, but I've also seen them running an old GS 750 Suzuki. you know, over those same kind of passes. But so, you know, when you buy bikes like this, you just kind of have to pick which area do you really intend to be in the most. If I intended to be in the dirt the majority of the time, this probably would not have been the bike I bought. But I knew that I was probably going to have a pavement bias, and so on that note, the pavement bias is wonderful. The street worthiness is wonderful. I have the Fuel X power module in it. I've got an aftermarket exhaust on it, and with those two things on there, this bike runs hard. It runs really, really well. It really opens that motor up. I can run down the road at 70, 75 and still pass cars easily with no issues. I have got throttle left to go, and that does include climbing these really, really steep grades and high elevations that I live in out here in the mountain range that I live by. The comfort is great for me. You know, I got my little clip-on right there. I got the little windshield, the little fairing in the front. Now, in a hard downpour, you're still going to get wet, but the rest of the time, you still got a nice windbreak in front of you. If you look at like a Street Fighter type bike with just a headlight in front, you pretty much get the brunt of everything. But this, no, it takes a lot of that for you. It takes a lot of that wind. You know, riding in cold conditions, I got a lot of brake here. The tank is actually pretty wide, and your legs kind of nestle in nicely right behind it. So the comfort for me, stock seat, I'm great, man. I can ride this thing all day long with zero issues. The utility of the bike is wonderful. I've commuted on this thing, you know, week in and week out, you know, sometimes for the last several weeks. Just commuting back and forth to work. I can take different routes to work, some scenic routes, some boring routes, some traffic, some interstate. I mean, I can do a little bit of everything with this thing. Zero issues. No issues at all. It handles them all just fine. And the best part is, especially in this shitty city traffic, is this thing will slice it up like a razor blade, man. It just slices right through all that shit with no problems at all. I gotta say, that part is great. That part is just phenomenal. It's just so much fun to ride it in those shitty environments because it just handles like it's like a bicycle with a big ass motor. That's really what it feels like. As far as quirks go, I see a lot of comments and stuff on the forums. I see it on my own stuff. Yeah, the bike's got quirks, but bad news, they all got quirks. I don't care what bike it is. Nobody goes down and buys a bike straight out of the box and it fits them perfectly forever. It just simply doesn't happen. Motorcycles are an extension of our bodies, and because of that, we require a certain comfort level with them. We will always change things about our motorcycles, and that's just how it goes across the board. And this one is no different. It's got quirks. It's got a clunky transmission. You know, finding neutral on this thing, shit. I'm pretty sure Columbus had an easier time finding America than you're going to have finding neutral on this motorcycle. Now, I have noticed one thing about it. Make sure your chain is well tensioned. And when I say well tensioned, I don't mean over tight. I mean tensioned properly. And when you get to a stop, if you haven't found neutral before you stop rolling, you can shift down into first gear, ease the clutch out a little bit, and as you ease the clutch out, put a little preload on that shift lever and pull that clutch back in, and it should go click right into neutral for you. Try that. I'm telling you, it works. I've stopped at 1,000 stoplights at this point, and that's been the most effective if I don't already shift into neutral before I get there. Sometimes I don't, because I like to leave it in gear until I come to a full stop, and then I make sure the idiot behind me comes to a full stop too. I kind of like to stay in gear so that if I can see Jughead behind me not slowing down fast enough, I can shoot out between the cars, or I can shoot out alongside the car in front of me. So again, it's kind of a double-edged sword there. It's got quirks. The clutch is funky. The suspension, it's kind of funky. It's really heavily preloaded in the rear. I'm on the softest adjustment I can get, and this bike is not really comfortable with my 180-pound body and my gear on, unless I put my, my travel bag on the back. Then it's comfortable. It's loading up that suspension a little bit, letting the suspension work. Even on mildly rutted up dirt roads, the suspension's it's doing this. It's not doing this, It's just too heavily preloaded, in my humble opinion. Last thing is would I buy it again? And the short answer is yeah, I'd buy it again. I definitely would buy it again. I have an absolute blast on this motorcycle. Again, 5,000 miles in 3 months, and I could do those standing on my head. It's just that easy on this bike. For me, the comfort is there, the reliability is there, the usability is there, the practicality is there. Everything that I require in a motorcycle is there. The only thing that isn't there is that long travel suspension for those off-road rides. Now, guys go out and bash these things around all day long off-road. I see it all the time. Good for them. Fantastic. I'm old and I whine a lot, okay? And I bitch if the suspension is not nice and plush, okay? And when you get old too, you're going to probably whine and bitch a lot just like I do. So I look forward to hearing all that whining and bitching. But otherwise, it was money well spent. I think it's a good value. Of course, if this bike's $8,500, imagine what all the rest of the bikes around me are. It's just based on geography, where you live, and or how far you're willing to travel to get your bike. This one, I've had a blast with it, and I do intend to keep it for probably a good while longer. I just enjoy riding it so much. So, 5,000 miles, I give it 1, 2 thumbs up. It's money well spent, and maybe it suits you, maybe it don't, but give it a shot first before you rule it out. Otherwise, hope you have a great weekend. Stay safe, drink a beer like me here, and you all keep that helmet side up. Bye for now.